Hey everybody, Mary Sheila here from Occidental Nutrition, and today I have my dear friend and colleague Marcella Friel. Hey Marcella.
Hi.
Some of you might know Marcella because she was on my summit last year, and I think I have other interviews here with her. And her and I have been working together for like 12 years, on and off through Bowman College. She was a chef instructor at Bowman College. That's where we met, and now she's got a amazing business called Women, Food, and Forgiveness. What I want to talk to you about today, Marcella, is something that about a week or two ago we were having a conversation, and you had heard somebody say something that I was like, "Wait, what?" So why don't you just tell us what you heard?
Well, thanks for having me here, Mary Sheila, and hi, everybody. So I think what we're going to talk about today is this question of autoimmunity. And I heard a practitioner of traditional Chinese medicine say that autoimmunity is becoming a spectrum in the way that autism has become a spectrum, and that we are all autoimmune. We're all on the autoimmune spectrum to some degree or another. And when I said that to you, Mary Sheila, you kind of went into like a little state of shock. It was like you had a little trauma response. You were like, I don't know. I'm not so sure about that. So yeah, this is what we're going to explore today.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, let's just talk a little bit about autoimmunity first. When somebody has an autoimmune condition, and the thing about autoimmunity is there's so many different kinds of autoimmune conditions. It just depends on which organs or glands or tissues the immune system has lost its tolerance to and is going after, right? So it could be going after the myelin sheath and the myelin in multiple sclerosis. It could be going after the lining of the GI tract in something like Crohn's or ulcerative colitis or celiac. It could be going after the thyroid gland in the case of Hashimoto's or Graves. So there's a lot of different ones, and the immune system has lost tolerance. The immune system is now attacking the very tissue that it has been raised and brought up to protect, to know this is myself and this is other things that I need to take notice of and decide, is it safe or do I need to go after it? And it loses that tolerance and starts going after self. One of the things that I hear in that, like, we're all this, is it puts us all in a box. And I feel like I'm always having to kind of take people out of a box and say, like, okay, well, even if you're hot and inflamed and pitta, like, let's find out how you can have a little bit of fermentation that's considered hot and you were told never to have it. Let's figure out how you can have these proteins that might actually really be nourishing, even though somebody told you never to have those. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm. Yeah, I hear the piece about being all in a box, you know, and none of us are. I mean, one of the things that you and I operate on in the Women, Food, and Forgiveness Academy, and that we've been taught through our mutual training, is about bio-individuality. Each one of us is unique biologically. And yet, what this TCM practitioner was saying was that there's a spectrum. So that's not a box, that's a spectrum.
True.
So I found it curious, perhaps we need to go back and redefine what it means to be autoimmune. Because I said this to a friend who is not educated in autoimmunity, and he said, well, that sounds like a positive thing, to be self-immune, autoimmune. So maybe we should just start with what that actually means and kind of break it down and see, like, is this something that is universally applicable to us in this society at this time, or is it really just much more of a selective, phenomenon? What is autoimmunity? Like, what actually is that?
Well, kind of what I was just saying, like, it's when the body's immune system that has been trained, and brought up, like, educated by the body in the thymus gland and by the cells to say, okay, this is self and this is everything else. So when you're on surveillance, this is self, but this is everything else, and this is what you're monitoring, and you're going after pathogens and viruses and bacteria. And when there's autoimmunity, part of the immune system loses that tolerance and it's overreacting. And,
Mm.
I will say, and just like to this practitioner's point, and, where I mean, I'm not saying I completely disagree, but I just feel like that is kind of an intense statement, I guess, for me. Um, is that if somebody does have, um, let's say they have the beginnings of autoimmunity and they start to have all these symptoms. And what happens often is they go to their doctor and the doctor runs the standard labs and they say, you're fine. And they're fine and fine until there's so much damage, they're
Uh,
not fine anymore. So they might, so symptoms of, autoimmunity, like that spectrum, could be things like swelling, could be joint pain, could be anxiety and depression, because there's a lot more inflammation. So anytime we have an immune response, we have an inflammatory response. And that inflammation is like running through our whole bloodstream and it's going to be passing through the blood. And then the brain is just kind of like, oh, and
mm,
anxiety, depression, fatigue, brain fog, infertility for both men and women, skin issues. So your body's trying to tell you stuff with symptoms. You're trying to tell your doctor, they're like, you're fine, next patient. So it's an opportunity. The supplement or the medication or the treatment is going to address a little smidge, but like, what about the sleep? What about, the nourishment? What about the stress management? Right? What about the emotional piece that is, even thinking about, wow, like the immune system is attacking me. There's emotions behind that, right?
yeah. Well, this is really fascinating because as you were ticking off that the symptoms of the inflammation and all of that, I thought, well, who among us who's listening or watching this is 100% clear of any of those? I mean, I've had like chronic low back pain for years and it's getting better, but it's certainly been with me for a while. So that's a kind of inflammation that I've got in my body that necessarily mean that I am potentially at the beginning of what could, heaven forbid, but what could evolve into some kind of an autoimmune condition. So that's a question. I don't know, but it's kind of just a question with an open hand. But the piece that I want to come back to from the emotional perspective. So just to give everybody who's listening a little context, Mary Sheila and I are the dynamic duo that co-teach in the Women, Food, and Forgiveness Academy, which is a program that I founded in 2018. And we work with healing the emotional and metabolic roots of yo-yo dieting, binge eating, sugar addiction, and chronic body shaming. And, so we talk about these issues like inflammation, and we do talk about autoimmunity as part of the academy. But we also will draw the emotional parallel, the emotional analogy. So when you were just saying, Mary Sheila, about here's the immune system, and our immune systems are educated by the thymus gland, like here's self, here's other, here's your job is to screen other. Is it friend, foe? Is it neutral? Right? So there's kind of like this watchdog element to the immune system. Thinking about the emotional correspondence of that, uh, one of the things that I find with the women who are attracted to the academy is that they tend to be by nature very sensitive. Well, number one, they've tried a million diets, the diets haven't worked, right? They're frustrated. They know that there's something deeper going on, and they tend to be very sensitive people. And one of the things that we work on in the academy is learning how to set boundaries. So a lot of women will use body weight, to protect, or people, not just women, but everybody, anybody, we'll use our body weight to protect ourselves, to do that job of setting the boundaries that we can't otherwise set because we're not 100% clear, like where we end and somebody else begins. So it's interesting to think that there's a physiological parallel to that. Like we could almost talk about, or could we talk about the autoimmune personality? Like I don't know if you've ever heard of the type C personality, like the breast cancer personality. Oh, I'm nice, I'm nice, I'm nice. I do everything for everybody else. I put myself at the bottom of my self-care list. And it's just like what you were saying, like, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. Until one day you've got a diagnosis and you got a deal. So I wonder, like, is there potentially a personality corollary to physiological symptoms of autoimmunity that we could explore here? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but what that makes me think of is the way that I talk about autoimmunity. And again, if we think about that spectrum, right? And it's like I always say we all have a backpack on. We're all born with a backpack. Okay. So some people are born with a heavy backpack from the get-go. Maybe there was even trauma when they were in utero, right? And their lineage has that trauma. So everybody has a backpack, and we can fill our backpack up a lot, especially if we're that person that just like puts ourselves at the bottom of the list. It's like, oh, I didn't have time to eat. Like, I either won't eat, and so I won't have the vitamins and minerals my body needs, or I'm just going to grab something quick and easy and non-nourishing, whatever that is. And or I'll just make popcorn, or I'll just eat a bag of chips, like whatever. So and then it could be where we live. It could be the immune system getting triggered by a virus in our body, by a mold in our home. It could be sugar intake. It could be relationships that are not serving us. So there's all these little pieces of the puzzle that start to add up, and all of a sudden the backpack gets really heavy. And that's usually, I mean, you would say this and I'd probably say this, and maybe most practitioners, it's like that's when people come to see us. I love when people come to see me that they're like, because I do, like, I have a vitality club, and people are like, I want to keep my vitality. I want to learn more, and I'm into it. And then it's like, all right, let's do this. And then sometimes people are like, I have this diagnosis. I need to change this picture. Let's do this. And that's like, yeah, let's do this. But we all have the backpack. And if we can listen to those symptoms, because sometimes they're kind of subtle, they're kind of
Yes.
whispering. And then sometimes they're megaphone style, right? And and I think if we look at that personality, like one of the things, and like and I think your first online course was Deeper Than Weight Loss that we did together.
Yeah.
And we connected the hormonal system to the chakras. And we have the heart chakra, which is love, and that's one of the things that you work on a lot with, is like forgiving ourselves and choosing love, right? Because it's so much easier. And then our cells are feeling loved, and they're feeling loved on an emotional level. And even that, like that love versus even like forgiveness or versus fear, and the immune system is like mounting this attack, like I got, and it loses tolerance. And sometimes it loses tolerance because of the foods that we're eating. Like, it's amazing to think, like, just as an example, like gluten molecules actually kind of look a little similar to thyroid tissue. So if we have an allergy to gluten and we're eating it a lot, and our body's mounting a response, it starts to get confused, and it goes after the thyroid tissue. And then we start destructing the thyroid tissue. So it's, so I think, I'm not sure if I answered your question about the the personality type, but that's what it made me think of. It's like, hey, we all got this backpack. It's like the straw that broke the camel's back. We got to pull some of those things out of the backpack, take some of those straws off the camel's back, one at a time, right? Create change and new habits. And that's kind of how we can do that.
Yeah, and I want to go back to that in a second, but let me ask you something here. So, is there, I'm not super educated in autoimmunity, like to the degree that you are, but so autoimmunity is something that can develop in the course of life. Can it be something that someone's born with as well? Can somebody be born into an autoimmune condition?
I have one friend who I believe she was like that. But I think what happens often, so that's a good question. I'm not sure I totally know the answer to that. But what I will say is, like, sometimes people have like the predisposition or the genetics, and our epigenetics, like our diet, our lifestyle, our circumstances, the emotional, all the things that are like that we're filtering through and experiencing and metabolizing, like all of life, can turn those genes on pretty quick, or it can turn it on later in life. So, like, I'll just give you an example. So in my family lineage, like my grandmother, I believe she had rheumatoid arthritis from the stories and her descriptions of how she looked. And my mom had low thyroid, which I believe was Hashimoto's, but most doctors don't test for it. My sister has Hashimoto's. So I know, like, hey, thyroid is something I'm paying attention to. And I watch my numbers go up and down. And I try to be gluten free as much as I can. I'm not perfect, but I'm married to an Italian, so sometimes it's difficult. But I do that, but I really limit it. My genetics are telling me something. I'm paying attention. So I'm doing my best to not turn on those genes by triggering it with certain foods and other things as
Yeah.
well.
Okay, so what you say is that there can be a predisposition. And in your case, you're talking about your family lineage, and you're looking at that going, okay, I need to pay attention to this because it's all around me and the women in my family. We can make certain choices that can either support the immune system or further stress the immune system. And if we stress it far enough, it can get to the point where it attacks us and creates that autoimmunity. Something that I observed in one of our mutual clients from several years ago, she was quite sick, actually, and she was quite sick with a autoimmune condition that I don't think it had a 100% clear diagnosis. She seems like really angry with herself. And you said, well, that's what autoimmune conditions are. It's the body attacking itself. So I wonder if, from an emotional point of view, we were just talking about having good personal boundaries and not being able to know the difference between ourselves and others, that could be a kind of emotional precondition. And the other one could possibly be unexpressed anger. Like we didn't get the ability to actually say, no, this is wrong. I don't deserve to be treated this way. And if that happens in childhood, then often what will happen is as children, we blame ourselves and we take that anger and drive it inward. And, there's a slogan that I like to use. The universe says yes to every thought, or another way to put it, every cell in your body hears what you say. So we're driving that anger inward. And then here comes this cellular, this immunological, like, okay, anger inward, check, here we go. And it starts that internal attack. I don't know. But going back to this idea of being on the spectrum, maybe the bottom line, whether we are on the spectrum or not, whether that can be proven or not, perhaps what we can agree on is that we are living in a time right now where our immune systems are being challenged in a way that our ancestors 100 years ago didn't have this challenge, or 200 years ago. Like our society is evolving in a way that our physiology is kind of slow to adapt and slow to catch up. And I wonder, Mary Sheila, like you're talking about the backpack, and that's kind of the backpack full of all those assaults. So maybe that's what we really need to be looking at, is that backpack.
Absolutely. Really good way to put it. And, stress, right? And all of those things are different forms of stress, right? So, it's not just like, oh my gosh, I'm so stressed out. It's like not getting enough sleep is a stress. Low blood sugar, high blood sugar is a stress. Like, all the things that happen to us as children are stressors. And we kind of, it kind of changes our stress response, even especially earlier when that happens. So it is all part of the puzzle. And when we are under chronic stress, here's kind of like the correlation too, is the lining of the gut is this beautiful emergence of like our enteric nervous system. Like we have our gut brain connection from our vagus nerve, and we have all this like nervous tissue, right? It's like our internal Wi-Fi, that's when we're like, ooh, I felt that in my stomach. Like that's a clear yes. That's a clear no. That's a clear, and then we have so that's kind of our vata, our ether and air, our Wi-Fi. And then we've got our microbiome, which is like our pitta, which is, helping us to metabolize, educating our immune system. kind of giving us a nice coating. And then we also have our immune system, and they're all interacting together. And 70% of our immune system lies there. But the immune system, you can think of it a little bit as kind of being like protected from that mucosal layer. Like we've got this nice, like kind of silky mucosal layer that's like protecting it. So food comes in and it's just like, it's intermingling, but it's not like the immune system is all exposed. But as soon as we have a lot of stress and maybe poor nutrition and all the things that could happen, and that lining can thin, that lining thins, and the immune system is much more exposed. And all of a sudden, the immune system is like interacting with things that normally would just pass right through because it was kind of like, had a little bit of a buffer. Doesn't have that same buffer. So that's one of the utmost things to kind of, reverse things and be able to tolerate things again, is to say, okay, like, I'm going to, maybe eliminate those things and, reduce my stress in whatever ways I can, with bedtime, with this and that. And then I'm going to, let that lining heal, reheal, maybe seal if it's leaky. And then I'm going to, add back healthful foods that maybe I wasn't sure about. But I'm also going to make sure that I pay attention to my ancestral lineage, and I'm going to like prepare them properly. If I really want to have gluten, maybe I'm not going to eat a tortilla. I'm going to have like sourdough bread that's been fermented properly. Right. That might work for some people, not everybody, but I'm going to pay attention to like properly prepared foods. I'm going to take that extra time in my day. So that's, I think, a big part of it is like, we can heal and seal that path that practitioner said. You might be here, you might be here, you might be here. Can you, go a different direction? Can you lower your immune response? Which is really kind of a great way to think about it, because a lot of times if you do have an autoimmune, they're going to be testing your antibodies. Sometimes you have to fight for it. You have to say, I want my antibodies tested. And they're going to say, it doesn't make a difference. But you can test it, and you can sometimes see them coming down, and that your immune system is calming down. And that is a major win. And then it's like, okay, doctors always say, I don't know what you're doing, but whatever you're doing, keep doing it.
I know. Isn't that great? I don't know. Well, why don't you know?
Yeah, I always say, well, they should ask.
Why don't you know what I'm doing? I'm getting better. I'm healing. Isn't that something you want to know about?
Yeah, so you could tell somebody else. Not that all doctors are like that, trust me. But right. I hear that a lot, and I'm like, did you tell them what you're doing? So
I don't care. Yeah. Well, the phrase that I'm hearing and everything that you're saying is pay attention.
Yeah.
And when we are under chronic stress, attention, especially attention to ourselves, is the last thing that goes out the window. Or first thing, I should say, first thing that goes out the window. And that goes back to sort of the personality thing. Oh, I'm fine. Oh, I'm fine. Oh, I'm fine. But actually, I'm really not. I'm not sleeping very well, but I'm just tanking down coffee to kind of compensate for my lack of sleep. My adrenals are getting exhausted, on and on and on. I'm fine until the body presents the bill. So I guess the bottom line from this conversation is maybe, it's hard to really say definitively we are all autoimmune. Like maybe that's not 100% accurate. But what we can say is we do have a stress backpack that we all carry that does, the immune system works through fighting. Its nature is to fight. Its nature is to ward off and to develop that kind of discernment. So the backpack can be beneficial in terms of helping to really kind of work our immune system out and get it in shape. But when the backpack becomes too heavy, the immune system starts to cave. What did you say? It becomes exposed, I think is the words that you used.
Yeah.
So it's hard to know definitively whether we're all autoimmune or not, but we are certainly all under stress. And for me personally, recently, what I have added to my self-care regimen is technology limitation. Mm-hmm. And you know how I am about this. And I find that being very discerning about what information I am taking in through technology and how I'm taking it in, like I really have a screen around that. I go into the internet, I get what I need, and I leave. Like I do not go down rabbit holes anymore.
Good.
Um, so so that might be another thing, but how about what would be some warning signs, Mary Sheila, for someone who might feel concerned that they could be developing an autoimmune condition? You know, you mentioned that doctors, somebody can go into their doctor and say, I feel this, this, and the doctor says, oh, you're fine. So what suggestions would you give for people to, like, at what point is it where you really need to pay much more attention?
Mhm. Well, if you were to go in and they said you're fine, and then the next time they say, oh, we do notice something, you have this thing, it's going to be the same thing. It's not going to be, I mean, sometimes medications are warranted and supplements are warranted, but it really is like, it really does boil down to how we're caring for ourselves. Like that is 80% of it, right? 80% of it is hydration. It is, nourishment. It is exercise, movement, sleep, joy, fun, processing, in a healthy way. And, it is the things we do every single day. It's breath, it's all of that. And so no matter what, like you could go and be like, this is what I have. The doctor or the practitioner is only going to be doing this much for you. You have to do the bulk of it. You have to transform and
Okay.
change. Right. And that's really like, I mean, that's the work both you and I do. I mean, when I have clients that are successful, I'm sure you do too. It's like, and a lot of times they're like, thank you so much. I'm like, okay, you're so welcome, but you did the work. Maybe I laid out the path for you, but you had to walk it. Like, and that is to me, like, and I'm sure to you, that's when I always say, like, that's when I do my happy dance, it's so exciting because,
Yeah.
so I do think like when we start to feel those symptoms, that's when, and I mean, I know a lot of us, like, I live and breathe nutrition, you live and breathe tending to the emotions. And I know that a lot of times we have to seek guidance for those things because not everybody understands how the body works. It is your body to know how it works. It is your emotional state to tend to empathetically, caringly, lovingly help to change what our cells are hearing every day and what our cells are getting nourished with every day, right? And how they're getting nourished and when they're getting nourished. Like there's so many little details that when we start to plug them in, it's like, oh, wait, I feel better.
Well, that's actually good news. That's actually good news. Like if
Yeah.
80% of it is our hand, and 80% of it really comes down to the fundamentals of self-care, then we have so much more agency. We have so much more power than, perhaps we might be led to believe. Now, here's the hitch with all of that. So we know, and everybody watching this, everybody listening to this conversation knows, everybody knows, everybody knows. Good night's sleep, really critical. Keeping your blood sugar stable. I mean, if you've been following Mary Sheila, you know about blood sugar, right? Keeping your stress levels down. Having nourishing relationships in your life. Dean Ornish, the big famous cardiologist from years ago, said isolation is one of the biggest stressors on the heart. More than smoking, more than diet, isolation is one of the worst. So, we know these things, but yet, and here's where, the tapping work comes into the work that I do. We know about self-care. We know, I wish I had $1 for every woman who comes to me and says, I know what I need to do, I just don't do it. I know what I need to do, I just don't do it. Well, why not? Well, when we really dig down, I'm not worth it. There are other things that are more important for me to do with my time than take care of myself. I was just talking with a friend right before we got on this call, and she's a coach as well. And I said, I don't see clients until noon in my schedule. Like my client schedule doesn't start until noon, because from the time I get up around 7 in the morning until noon, that's my time. That's my time for all my self-care. Because if I'm going to be a competent healer, I have to take care of this vessel. So perhaps the beginning, the root is to say and to know, you, whoever you are listening to this, you are worth what it takes. You're worth the expense. You're worth the time. And really, if you really stop and think deeply, beyond just simply a knee-jerk reaction, what in your life is more important than your health and your well-being? See?
Yes.
Like,
Yes, totally. That's great.
without that, what do you have?
Yeah. Yeah.
You might get a great promoted work because you're a super A-driven, corporate contributor. But if you're feeling sick as a dog and you're waking up in the morning with your brain in a fog and your blood sugar's all over the place and your gut is on fire, what good is it?
Right. Yay. Well, thank you, Marcella. Super fun to talk to you about this conversation. I love it. I think this is a great place to say thank you, and thank you for watching and listening. And, you can, if you want to talk to Marcella, her info is below, and you can always look at some of my offerings too. But regardless, it's just great to have you here, and please subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
You are worth it.
Uh-huh.